I've never seen an assault on the media as savage as this one we're seeing today at the ABC.
Well, it's a shocking story, isn't it? That is the head of investigative journalism at Australia's national broadcaster, the ABC. Their offices in Sydney were raided last week, police looking for anything related to the so-called Afghan files. Hundreds of top-secret military documents leaked to the ABC by our guest, David McBride. Well, David was a military lawyer with Australia's Special Forces in Afghanistan and is about to face trial. We'll be asking him about why he did it, the terrible cost to him personally, and if he fears going to jail for the rest of his life. But first, let's take a look at the raids.
A remarkable story is happening in Australia right now that raises real questions about the ethics of the Australian government.
Australian police have raided the offices of the country's national broadcaster.
It's over a series of 2017 stories known as the Afghan Files.
The ABC's Afghan Files exposed possible war crimes by Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan.
They were based on hundreds of pages of secret defence documents leaked to the ABC.
The images of police poring over private emails inside the offices of a major broadcaster are not something we often see in a free democratic society.
To have a warrant executed on the headquarters of the national public broadcaster, it is really serious, and we take it very, very seriously.
I've never seen an assault on the media as savage as this one we're seeing today at the ABC.
The raids come in the wake of former military lawyer David William McBride being committed to stand trial for theft and leaking Defence Department documents. He doesn't deny handing over the reports on Afghanistan.
They date back years since they were published or put to air. Why all of a sudden now?
Well, remember now that the police have laws by which they can do this.
Last year, the Parliament passed extensive and intrusive laws that essentially restricted the work of journalists. It means Commonwealth public servants cannot communicate information to journalists as whistleblowers without potentially facing a 5-year jail term.
No sector of the community should be immune for this type of activity.
Journalism is not a crime. So I would say to all of the journalists at the ABC, to all the journalists across Australia, don't be afraid of the job you do. Stand up and be proud of it.
Well, we can now speak to the man at the very centre of the raid, the whistleblower who handed over hundreds of defence documents to the ABC, David McBride. David, thank you very much for joining us on the Nexus today. Your trial begins in a matter of hours. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling confident, actually. In fact, I don't think I've ever liked myself so much, and I don't think I've ever been so proud to be an Australian.
And you're a lawyer, you're defending yourself. The pressure's on.
It is a bit. Luckily, I've had a few dry runs. I've been in court about 6 times now, and I always get nervous, but each time I get better.
David, the charges include theft of Commonwealth property, namely war crimes investigation files, 3 counts of breaching the Defence Act, and potentially a prison sentence of between, 50 and 60 years. This is a very serious case against you.
Yeah, it's serious, all right. It could be the rest of my life in prison.
As you're preparing your defence, is this an unequal situation, or has the state provided you with enough material so that you're on an equal footing?
I always try to be fair when I can, and the police have prepared the case very fairly in that they have put in all my internal complaints, and it paints quite a clear picture that I spent 2 years complaining to anyone that would listen internally, complaining to the police, and seeking every possible internal resolution before I went public. And it's good that the police have actually put all that in the brief.
David, let's talk about exactly that then. You had 2 tours of Afghanistan, beginning in 2011, working with Special Forces as a military lawyer. Now, you would have been consulted about the legality, for example, of engaging the enemy, the Taliban. What happened in your experience there that made you leak those documents?
Something had been building from my first tour that something wasn't right in the senior management of the Defence Force and the way they were running the war. It seemed like we didn't actually want to win. We just were doing the same old things and putting up PowerPoint diagrams which said next year we were going to win. But we didn't actually have a workable plan. My second tour, all my suspicions came to fruition when something happened which no sane general or no sane politician would ever do to their own troops. And I knew at that moment, a bit like my father with thalidomide, he couldn't necessarily prove it, but he knew it, and I knew it, that we had a totally ruthless and cynical leadership who just were happy for soldiers to die so they could look like leadership material. We had lost any kind of moral compass and had been totally replaced by the opinion poll and the spin doctors, and we were actually killing our own people.
David, for the audience, they're going to think this is crazy. Why would politicians want to tighten the rules of engagement to such an extent that Australian soldiers were put at a disadvantage on the battlefield, died in greater numbers?
The mind boggles, and I guess it was just by increment and increment. There was no adult supervision, and because they could get away with it, and it's like putting chocolate in front of a baby, they can't resist. And it was made clear to them that deaths were good for their popularity. Going to funerals made people think that they were statesmanlike, whereas if we had battles with the Taliban, that didn't cause them any popularity. And so it looked like they did a subconscious deduction and said, dead soldiers good, dead Taliban bad, and that's what they went with.
David, to be clear,
you're saying
that the politicians tightened the rules of engagement in order to put their own troops at a disadvantage so more of them would die, so that when they attended the funerals, they would then create a swell of patriotic pride which lifted their own ratings amongst the public.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, well, you complained...
I will deny it, of course.
Of course, yes. Well, you complained to your superiors, you went to the police, you're saying they didn't take you seriously. Why should anyone take you seriously?
Well, they didn't say it was right, but they basically, it was a bit chilling. It was like one of those Hollywood movies. The police looked at me with a smile on their face and said, the crime is something that people other than the government do. Crime is not something the government does. And we investigate people other than the government. And that chilled me.
How are you going to convince a judge of what you've just told us?
I've been wanting to get in front of a judge for years. At the time, I was almost going to punch a senior officer in the face so I could have a trial. Because I know the sharp mind of a judge will be able to see what I see. This was no accident. This was creepy. And this was definitely disrespecting our men and women in uniform and putting the short-term needs of politicians above the long-term needs of our nation.
David, we're just going to take a look at how the media treated the documents. As we know, David leaked the papers to the ABC, and journalists there gave them extensive coverage. 2017, and the ABC publishes the so-called Afghan files. Hundreds of pages of secret Defence Force documents purportedly revealing that Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan had killed unarmed men and children. Other documents referred to a soldier chopping off the hands of dead Taliban fighters. Another revealed an SAS trooper had pulled a gun on a female Australian spy who he had been assigned to protect. Yet more revealed the relationship between the SAS and Australia's other top unit, 2nd Commando Regiment, were on a perilous knife edge. Did these revelations put at risk Australia's national security, or did the public have a right to know? So in summary, the ABC concentrated on the bad soldiers, and David here wanted to concentrate on the bad politicians. David, when you saw the ABC's coverage, what was your reaction?
I was gutted. I just thought that's the last straw. In fact, I made up my mind to leave Australia, and I no longer wanted my children to be Australians.
What is it about the coverage that upset you, though?
It was such a predictable non-story. They played a lot of dramatic music, and they said one night on a dark patrol, a group of SAS soldiers shot a farm boy hiding behind some rocks. They obviously mistakenly thought he was an insurgent. Now that's not great, but it's hardly the crime of the century. And yet what I'd pointed out to them was probably the most hideous thing, I believe. Well, if there's something worse has happened in Australian history, I haven't seen it.
Let's look at it from the ABC's point of view. You say it's hardly the worst thing that could happen, but there was an implication that some of these incidents were deliberate or negligent. Were any of those incidents resolved through the military courts or in other ways?
They attempted it, but I'm glad you brought that up, because here's a really good point. With all that froth and bubble and all the scrutiny the Australian forces have had in the 10 years they're in Afghanistan, you know how many convictions for wrongful death we've had on soldiers? 0. We've had one trial and it was thrown out. So the idea that there were some sort of killing machines was just such a hack piece of journalism. It was pretty disgraceful, frankly.
Well, but the military, other soldiers who you may keep in contact with, they must have looked at this coverage and said, David McBride handed us over and exposed us in public. That obviously wasn't your intention. Well, what would you say to them now?
No. It's a kind of comedy of errors, exactly. I was not only was it the wrong story, but I was a pariah amongst the very people I was trying to look out for. So yeah, it was going from bad to worse.
Well, let me ask you, the ABC, did the ABC promise to protect your identity, or what was the arrangement between you and them? Because obviously your identity was exposed and now you're facing trial.
I felt so strongly about it that I said, if you need me to go on TV to prove this case, I will do it. Come hell or high water, come jail, I'll lose my career, but I will do it. And I was incensed that the other source that they had got an actor to play him. But not only did they run the exact opposite story to the one I was giving them, but they made it very clear with all the documents that it was me that had given them the documents. And so they also threw me to the wolves. It was, well, you can imagine what I thought. But by then I was kind of unshockable.
You're basically saying that the way they published the documents led only back to one source, you.
Yeah, with these classified documents, every time you print one, the machines record who printed it. And because I was so hell-bent on proving my case, what I used to do is I used to go into work at night and I used to search through the secret files looking for things which showed bad faith and lies on part of our leaders. And I gathered them all together. But the one link in these documents spanning over 10 years was me. And the computer printout would have shown all of these documents were printed by me, looked up by me, and they used every single one of them. So it was pretty obvious where they...
David, journalists would say that they're grateful to their sources for providing the documents, as you did, but it's not for you to control what they do with it and how they prioritize the story.
Of course. I mean, I don't bear any really great malice. It's a funny story the way it panned out. It's not like the movies where it went smoothly. But of course, it was always a risk that I took, and it's always his prerogative to do the story as he sees it, not as I tell him to.
David, of course, the Australian Federal Police raided the offices of the ABC and of a newspaper journalist, and they've also been in touch with another journalist. But let's just concentrate on the raids at the ABC, or the exercise of a search warrant, as the police put it. What did you make of that?
I think what might have happened was they've heard through the grapevine that I say there was a much bigger crime in the documents than the one revealed, and that I think this is Watergate. And I think someone's twigged and said, we need to get those documents before anybody has a chance to have another look at them. I think it is actually quite a scary development. If you took away the names of the nations and you compared to what's happening in Australia to Russia, China, the Weimar Republic, we don't come out of it too well.
Now, when you say you think this is Australia's Watergate, you're referring to that point at which Richard Nixon says to David Frost, it's not illegal if the president does it. And you're thinking that's what the Australian politicians are thinking?
Absolutely. I think that they think just because the police or the border forces, they call them, are doing their bidding, they can do whatever they want. They can treat anyone that criticised the government as a spy, and they can chuck them in jail. They can bug their political opponents' offices. They reckon that they can do any enemy of the government is an enemy of the state. They don't realise that that's not actually true.
David, do you have faith in the judge to come out with the right decision as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, look, I do. I do have faith in the judiciary, and also it's not so much about whether I go to jail. To a certain extent, the one person that judges me is myself. It's going to be my conscience that kills me. My conscience has already killed me a couple of times in my life, and it's the one thing I fear. I think I've done the right thing. And whether I go to jail or not is not that judge. I do think the judge will not send me to jail, but I'm not putting my self-worth on that decision.
Well, the thing is, you've already publicly admitted taking the documents, handing the documents over to the media. So under what grounds might a judge be inclined to not give you a prison sentence?
Because I would say, going back to the English Civil War, which is something that I love, at some point it is actually the duty of the patriot to say to the minister, no, minister, you cannot kill your own people for your own popularity. You cannot steal Australia's money for your own popularity. All the charges have this one same phrase in them, that the actions I did were not part of my duty. Now, I'm going to say it clearly was my duty to stand up and do what's right for the country, because I don't work for the government, I work for Australia.
David, you would say that what you did to protect the soldiers, and others would say that you actually put them in harm's way because you exposed things to the public that were supposed to be secret. Which is it?
Well, yeah, the government will say that, but that's a crock. There's a confusion between the term national security and national shame. There is nothing truly secret about what happened 10 years ago on a mountaintop in Afghanistan in a war we no longer fight. There are things which are terribly embarrassing for the government, and I'm not putting soldiers in danger. If anybody finds out that we knew about these crimes and we covered them up, that puts Australia in danger. That puts our soul of a nation in danger.
David, let's just talk about whistleblowing for a moment. You mentioned your father and the thalidomide scandal. He was the one who said that this drug can actually cause birth defects. Is there something in your DNA that just needs to sort of defy authority and get the truth out there?
I think there might be. Yeah, I guess we don't scare easily. And he just, of course, there's a flip side to the story. While everybody remembers the discovery he made, I imagine what he remembers is the babies he didn't save. I think he was haunted all his life, not by the fame, but knowing that many babies were born dead or with deformities. And that's what drove him. And I think that's the case with me. I often feel that what's driving me is almost the ghosts of Australian soldiers of the past, the Anzacs. And it's almost like they're saying to me, you need to go on with this. We're not going to let you sleep. We're not going to let you eat until you keep going. And only when you've done what you need to be done are we going to leave you and drift off back to the graveyards and let you sleep. So I think we have that in common. We don't sort of see a sort of a bright, happy picture. We see the ghosts of what needs to be done.
And regardless of this court case, do you think your actions have made any difference?
Yeah, I do. That's what I was thinking today. Whatever happens in the court case, I was chuckling to myself. I just imagined imaginary scene in Australian Defence Force headquarters tomorrow when a bright bushy-tailed staffer comes in and says, I've got this great idea to boost our popularity. And I can just see it's not going to get up. People will be a little bit more scared now that they can just do what the hell they want and treat the Defence Force as if it's some sort of plaything.
David, I can see you're proud of your actions, but it has come at a great personal cost to you. Can you just tell our viewers about that?
Yeah, look, it has. I lost my job, obviously, and it was a job I really loved. I was a soldier first, and then I became a lawyer, and it was the perfect combination of the two. So it wasn't easy to give it up. I lost pretty much all my friends. I lost my marriage because I had to make a choice whether to go on with a complaint or give it up, and I chose to go on with the complaint.
Why would it cause you to lose your marriage and your friends? Is there some sort of culture in Australia against whistleblowers, or was it just simply the pressure that was coming from the state and elsewhere?
I think it's all those things, and you've just got to carry on with your mission, and you are a little bit one-sided, but people are either with you or against you, and I think there's a certain amount of embarrassment for people if you are a troublemaker. No one wants to have dinner with you or talk to you because, I don't know, you're difficult, you're embarrassing. I didn't find that in the UK, and that's why I'm a bit of an Anglophile. My old friends from the UK, they don't mind that. And if you've got an English friend, they're a friend for life, whether you get in trouble or whatnot. But I found a lot of my Australian friends were kind of fair weather. And I think that's one of the good things about this. You actually find out who's worth having as a friend and who isn't.
Have you found in the public sphere that you've been attacked by politicians, TV pundits and the like?
I see quite a bit of hate talk on the chat.
What do they say?
The government has control on internet chat lines. You get a lot of people putting me down and saying what a bad person I am. I think you can feel the tension sometimes. There's a former SAS officer who's now in government who puts me down because I think he didn't do his job.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think people are beginning to warm to me because they can see I'm just being honest.
And just finally, David, as we mentioned at the top of the programme, potentially facing decades in prison, do you ever have any regrets about leaking those documents?
No, you don't. I often get asked this, and while it sounds kind of corny, it's just true. But when you're a soldier, and I was a soldier all my life, and you see things in a soldier mindset, you know what the right thing is to do. And uncomfortable as it may be, you don't do a pros and cons study and think, oh, you know, it's going to be better for me. You just do it. And I didn't really think, I knew jail was a possibility, but I didn't think about whether it was going to be a good thing or a bad thing. I just knew what needed to be done, and I did it. And I can never regret that.
David McBride, thank you so much for joining us here on The Nexus. And thank you also for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. Until next week, though, goodbye.